Please welcome your host, Nick Aldinger.
All right, welcome to the third installment of Business Builder Insights. I'm your host, Nick Aldinger. Business Builder Insights is a thought-provoking six-part speaker series designed to help you, the business owners and key decision makers, develop a strategy to help scale your company. Over the course of the six-part series, we'll be interviewing dynamic panelists consisting of successful executives, entrepreneurs, and local subject matter experts who will be speaking on topics directly affecting small and medium-sized businesses. Business Builder Insights is absolutely free, and our goal is to simply equip you with the tools and resources necessary to impact your bottom line. And today's segment is all about improving the business and financial acumen, and is titled, Understanding the Metrics Needed to Drive Profit. But before we invite our panelists on stage, I'd like to remind you to stick around for the Traction segment, featuring Brent Odkin, immediately following our panel's discussion. The Traction segment, presented by Profit Creek, is hosted by Brent Odkin. And today, segment, Brent's going to be breaking down how to use and implement a scorecard as it relates to the financial metrics and leading indicators that we're going to discuss today. And we also have a special guest joining us to talk about a business tax credit that you definitely want to be aware of. So be sure to stick around for those segments coming up here shortly. I also want to say thanks to our sponsors. Business Builder Insights wouldn't be possible without the support of our sponsors. I'd like to thank BBSI, Profit Creek, and Strategic Tax Solutions. I'd also like to thank our media sponsor, Iliad Media Group, and this month's session sponsor, IBL Events. And if you like the content and speakers here on Business Builder Insights, we invite you to attend our in-person event, Business Builder Day, on May 6th, 2021, at the Galaxy Events Center. Here we'll have keynotes, business seminars, networking, and we'll be showcasing some of the best businesses the Treasure Valley has to offer. Registration is absolutely free, and you can do so today at businessbuilderday.com. So again, let's set the stage with our panelists, and before we do that, we're going to hear a quick message from our sponsors. I want to thank you for joining us, and we'll be back shortly. Thank you.
So, you're a business owner, or the marketing director, or the PR guy, maybe even lead of sales.
My office, right now, Jeff.
Problem is, you're likely all of these things and need Iliad Media Group to help you be heard and found. Get back to business as usual. You probably think you can handle all of the demanding marketing requirements to succeed in today's business world, telling yourself, it's fine if I miss some things. I can do it myself. I don't need help. My cousin's a graphic designer. Realistically, there's just way too much to do for one person. You need a team that can help get you found online, place your marketing in front of the right demographic, have your message heard by real people, be transparent about insights and reporting, craft a clear story for your brand, help grow your bottom line, and advise you as marketing specialists who have your best interest in mind. Whew. I think you know where I'm going with this. Introducing Iliad Media Group. We do the unusual so you can get back to business as usual.
Wow, BBSI, where have you been these last 15 years in my life? Hi, my name is Mia Paulus, and I am the CEO of an outsourcing company called The Center. We have been looking for a strategic partner to help us with compliance for our clients, specifically payroll, HR, workers' comp, and safety. After meeting with Jason a couple of times, it was great to know a company cared as much about entrepreneurs and executives as we do. I learned how much BBSI cares about the success of businesses they work with, and we are experiencing fast growth here at the center, and I'm excited to see what BBSI and the center can do together to simplify business for our clients so they can have the success and the quality of life that they deserve.
All right, welcome back to Business Builder Insights. I'm your host, Nick Aldinger. This segment is called Understanding the Metrics Needed to Drive Profit. And today, I'm glad to announce a set of panelists that are definitely the subject matter experts in the field of financial and business metrics. And let's introduce them right now. So on the stage with me, I have Jade Millington, CFO and Business Advisor Turnaround Specialist with Ampleo. I have Cameron Keller, CEO of Keller CPAs. And I have Greg Yerxa, who's the business operations specialist with the U.S. Small Business Administration. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen.
Thanks
so
for having us.
We have a lot to cover, and I want to start with you, Jade. You know, being small business owners, we know that we're usually tracking a lot of different metrics because we're wearing a lot of different hats. We're wearing the marketing hats, the sales hat, the operations hat. But when it comes down to it, what really should we be tracking when it comes to financial metrics?
Well, it's a great question. You know, maybe starting, it's important to understand, why do we even measure certain things? Why do we have metrics? And if I were to sum it up, I'd say it's because management needs actionable data. They need ways to make better decisions. And so for me, the very basic metrics would be to look at profitability metrics. And I kind of break them into two categories. I have a margin ratio section and a return ratio section. So the margin ratios really are looking at what is the ability of the company to convert sales into profits in various different ways. And the return ratios look at the ability of a company to turn sales into a return for shareholders. So there's a number of metrics that we look at. For example, there's a gross profit margin metric. That measures out of every dollar of sale, how much is left after you pay for the cost of whatever the product is that you're selling. In other words, how much is left to pay for everything else. An EBITDA metric, EBITDA is a word that's thrown around a lot. Sometimes people don't know it means earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So it's really a look at how much profit did you have from operations before non-operating and non-cash expenses. It's important because that's a metric frequently used when valuing a business. So it's important to know that one. And then there's an operating profit. After you've taken out the non-cash, what's left as a percentage of sales to be able to pay interest and taxes. Net profit, that's after everything. Did you ultimately make money or not? That's an important, very key metric to know. And cash flow. Cash is king, as we all know. Profits are not the same as cash in the bank, and so it's important to keep an eye on what's your cash flow doing.
Okay. And I know for the viewers who are watching today, we are actually going to give you a lot of supporting details. So if you registered today, all these metrics that we have displayed on the board, we're going to be sending you how to calculate them and the details behind these ratios. So you don't have to write all this down. We're going to send these to you in an email after today's segment. So be sure to look for that if you registered for this event. Let me ask you, Cameron. Jade hit on it just a little bit, but why do we care about these metrics? Why are they so important?
Well, I think Jade brought up an important point. Everything that we measure should have some kind of a reason that turns into action, whether that's at a staff level, whether that's at the entire organization level. Every one of these metrics should turn into something that's important, that helps us understand what we should be doing, and really how well some of the goals and some of the milestones that we've set, how well we're doing, and then course corrections that maybe we need to take. So.
And Greg, how about from your perspective? I mean, you're dealing with a lot of businesses. You know, it's probably important at the beginning to obviously be tracking, but is it just as important for the end game as well?
Yeah, well, with the SBA, we see a ton of businesses seeking financing and capital sources. So all of these metrics are something your lender is definitely going to be looking at. You should have a handle on before you start talking to them. So yeah, it's definitely something to concentrate, or at least be aware of what you know and what you know you don't know.
I think something else that is important is a lot of these metrics are really important, as Greg just mentioned at the very beginning. It is very possible to reasonably predict if a business, especially a startup business, how well that business is going to do or not do. I mean, we can financially determine or project long before someone spends 50 grand, 100 grand, or whatever the outlay might be. There's no reason that we couldn't reasonably project what needs to happen and what should happen so that someone doesn't go into business. Because a lot of times startups go into business, they're excited, they have a lot of emotion behind it. But the problem is if you put numbers to it with these metrics, it's not going to work. Meaning, I mean, whether it's a flower shop or a coffee shop or whatever it is, If we break it down and determine I need to sell X amount of flowers per day using some of these metrics, and it doesn't pencil out, then there's no sense to spend that $50,000 to $100,000 of initial outlay to get the sign, to get the new lease space, to do all these other things that in the end we can say, hey, if you can't sell X amount of, whatever it is, widgets or flowers or pizzas or whatever it is, you shouldn't do this. And these metrics help, like Greg said, just right on the outlay of making sure that you don't go down the wrong path, make wrong decisions that really actually cost real life dollars versus on paper. We can do the analytics long before we actually take money out of our pocket. And I've seen that so many times with businesses that if they ran some of these metrics and estimates and projections long before they got excited or long before they implemented and went forward, it would save them significant amount of dollars that's going to happen in 3 to 6 to 8 to 9 months down the roads.
Yeah, and I think with awareness, when you're looking at these things and you start to, one, make decisions based on them, both in a proactive way, hey, when we hit this particular threshold, that's when we're getting the next admin or that next support person. We will teach, and through a lot of our resource partners, that business planning aspect, you will have a very good idea when that's going to happen. And 3 months before you had planned to make that decision, if the numbers aren't tracking to where they need to be to execute, well, then we got to re-roll it a little bit and figure out where those things are. So being nimble and being ahead of the game definitely comes with understanding what these mean, how they speak to you, and then the individual nuances for your particular industry. Every industry has their own that they concentrate on, at least universally, and especially from a lender perspective.
But it seems pretty intuitive that these are the metrics that we should be tracking as small, medium-sized business owners. But do you really feel that the business owners, because all of three of you deal with business owners on a regular basis, whether it's from a CFO perspective, the CPA, and the lender, and business opportunity specialists, you get to see it all. But we wouldn't be talking about it if everyone was doing it, right? And so do we have a disconnect with truly understanding financial metrics as it relates to a business?
I think there is a disconnect, and largely it's driven because people start a business, like Cameron was mentioning, they're really engaged, they love what they're doing, but it takes so much time to just make sure that the widget is produced, and they're trying to talk to a customer or whatever. They don't necessarily have the time or take the time to look at the metrics and to really dig into financials. They may really love what they're doing and have a great time, but if you don't look at the metrics, I think of one client that was in the manufacturing and fabrication space, very, very good at what he was doing, had a great team of people, couldn't figure out why he wasn't making money, working really hard, everybody's really engaged. But when we got in and started looking at various metrics, he started to understand, when I'm estimating a job, I'm not thinking about all of the costs really associated with it. I'm underbidding everything. And once we got that fixed, then he started to actually make some more money, which was useful. But trying to pull him away from the machines, if you will, and focus on a different item took some real work. It's hard.
So also from what I've seen is a lot of businesses either have simple, like one or no metrics, and other businesses have so many metrics. So you need to find that right balance. And then Greg brought up a very good point as well, is it's going to be industry specific. If I'm not producing or manufacturing something, I may not be looking at a gross profit ratio because it doesn't matter to my industry. But I think that's the disconnect, is we have some people that have hundreds of metrics that then they don't even know what they're really looking at because they lose sight of it. There's just so much to look at. And then you have some that just don't have any metrics. And so I think it's important to find those 2, 3, 4 maybe metrics that really help drive your business. I have a client, I actually have a couple of different clients. One's almost $2 million in revenue a year, and one is $15 million plus. And they know their numbers so well, their costs so well, that sales and monthly sales, even weekly sales, are the things that actually could drive almost all their business decisions because they've already got all of their costs in check and in control. They know exactly what's going to happen when I have $1 of sales. They know how much will trickle down to the bottom line. So they use sales, like that's one of their most important metrics. That's how they almost manage their business, is just knowing sales, because they know everything else falls into place if they hit X dollars of sales per day, per month, per whatever. And so in that regard, one simple metric was enough. Other companies need more, more metrics, and it seems like finding that right balance is the tricky part.
And Greg, when we were talking, behind the stage here, you mentioned the importance of a value proposition. This is more of an intangible metric, but you said it's so important for people to understand a value proposition, and there's a disconnect that often leads to missed profits as it relates to a value proposition. Can you expand on that for the audience?
Yeah. So we deal with plenty of startups, and that's where someone has their idea and they're taking it to market, and there's a perceived value they have with what they are doing. And when we work with them, either with the SBA or one of our resource partners, before they get to the brunt force of the market, telling them whether they got it right, we'll ask those questions, right? And there's plenty of tools. But the intangible metric of that being understanding your value proposition, and as you mentioned, if you don't fully understand all of the different attributes of the value you're providing, whether it be a product or a service, then chances are very good that you're not pricing it right. You might have a fantastic value offering that you haven't fully grasped your arms around, that you are taking to market at a price well below what you could demand for it because of not understanding the value proposition. So definitely undervaluing your value will likely lead to underpricing it and then lost revenue. So there's a couple of tools that any business could use that are really easy. And one of them is called the business model canvas or business canvas model. And it's about, 20 or so blocks. It's primarily for startup, but I would definitely plug in your existing business and see where it stands. But each of these blocks have different sizes corresponding to the value they have in planning your business. And the two biggest blocks on the whole thing is, what are you doing? What are you bringing to market? And then who wants it? And BSU does a fantastic thing, or at least they had in the past, at the Venture College, where students can work on a business simultaneously with their academic career. And it's not just business students, it's all different kinds of disciplines. And one of the first parts of that process with the Venture College is to go through those two boxes, and this is before they've taken anything to market. So go out and find 100, 150 people that might want what you want, and ask them how they want it. What is important to them? And then they get done with that, and usually from where they started with what they thought their value was to where they end up, drastically different. Sometimes maybe it's a little bit off, but that's good, valuable input. Now, from an ongoing business perspective, a lot of businesses have this passionate idea as to what they provide, right? But we need to listen. And it's really quite easy nowadays, especially in the internet age, to get feedback from the people you're selling your products to. Say, hey, what do you like? How do you like it? Not in this like super intrusive, hey, tell me everything about your experience with our company, but just responding to what they say. Maybe it's a different size box, or maybe it's a different frequency of billing. Maybe it's different options. All of these things that you won't have any idea about. And I think you had mentioned, Cam, before, businesses don't necessarily always listen to their customers. Like, no, you're wrong, right? And there's a great example of this where a new company, and this was probably more prevalent during the dot-com bubble or before the bubble, right? You have a new idea and you take it to market, and then the wrong people, to the business's sense, the wrong people were buying and using the services. Well, you as a business owner need to go, well, why didn't we identify this market beforehand? And I would say generally it's because you've missed something in your value proposition. You're bringing something to the market that you didn't fully understand has value for a particular segment, and you need to get your arms around that. And one way to do that is just constantly ask for feedback. Gather it, having those social media presences or those tools where you're getting information back, right? And there's a lot of stuff, which probably another 3 hours show worth of getting customer feedback. But just listening and talking to those people, asking them, hey, what do you like? Right? And that's why we've got stuff like Dollar Shave Club always pops up, right? Obviously, I don't shave as much, right? But they have a huge value proposition, and just a little constructive or creative destruction there going on where they upended that industry, and then you see all these other people following. They really understood from the get-go what their value was. No nonsense, stuff that cuts hair off your face, and a bunch of other stuff, right? So, yeah, doesn't come up in the metrics, but it's definitely important, especially when it impacts your bottom line so impactfully, I guess.
So I think, just going off of what Greg's saying, what he's describing is vital that every business understand, but it's not measured necessarily on a financial statement. So there isn't some of the initial metrics that we talked about. What he's saying is we've got to have some kind of metric that probably measures what our clients are saying, because our clients are the ones who pay us. And if we don't understand what they're wanting and find some kind of measurement tool, then we've got a problem. So like for us in our business, we have just found people are not actually excited about tax returns, the actual tax return themselves. In fact, if they were like a baseball card, those things would be mint condition because they get their tax returns and they put them into their drawer, and 27 years later, their corners are not bent because they've never looked at them again. So if we think of our tax return as the value, we're going to be wrong. And so what we've got to do is talk to our clients and understand what is it that you want? What are the value propositions? Reducing audit liability or audit risk, that's a value proposition. And reducing your taxes and what you owe, that's value. But we don't get that until we actually ask, like Greg's saying, our customers. So I think part of this whole thing is don't get lost in metrics that actually make you happy, because your client are the ones who actually are the ones driving the profit. It's not just you. I mean, there's some that are you as the business, and then there's some that the client has to be involved in. And so measure things that help meet that client experience. As Greg was saying, if we can meet the client experience, a lot of the metrics, including profitability, will start to take care of themselves. If we don't meet the client experience and find ways to measure that, we're going to have challenges irrelevant of what we're doing and doing well at the business level.
Yeah, and it doesn't always have to be reactive, right? So the academic tool to look at this would be something called the value disciplines model. And the tax return example plays into this huge. So in the value disciplines model, there's three ways of looking at things, customer relations, product leadership, or operational excellence, right? So with a tax return, the product is the same. There's really no innovation on it other than innovatively responding to IRS guidance, I suppose. So you're really concentrating on the customer service, right? So in the previous example, we're going out and getting information so that we can fully understand and ascertain what our value proposition is. But in a proactive leading thing, you make a little X cross thing and you say, which one am I? And generally in industry, you can excel or just knock it off the rails on one of those. And it's really hard to master all three of them. And a very brief example is Cabela's. You might associate them with a fantastic customer relations type thing. But looking at them from an academic perspective, they are off the charts in operational excellence. And we briefly talked about this as a little bit of a long story, but they have huge stores. And people drive from all over to go to these huge stores. And they'll spend 6 hours in there, and then they'll leave, and the only thing they'll buy is a $5 bag of nuts. Then they'll go back to wherever they were, and they'll order $3,000 worth out of the catalog, right? Cabela's really excels, and their value proposition is that massive distribution network. And this has changed a little bit since they've changed ownership. Back in the day, that's what they did, right? Apple, product leadership. The other things, not as much of a priority as product leadership, right? So proactive and reactive ways of looking at it for sure.
So I think that what Greg is talking about understanding what the customer wants is really important, and Cameron's made great points. I think one important component of that is be willing to kind of check yourself. You may get feedback from customers that you didn't think would happen or you're unprepared for, or you may feel like it's an attack on you personally or the business idea. I had a software client, SaaS business, and as they'd go out and talk to customers, the customers would give feedback, we like these parts, but we sure wish it did this. And the owner and developer would be like, well, that's not the intention. You're thinking about it wrong. And this happened over and over. And so many customers kept saying, we want this piece. And it just got ignored because it wasn't something that the owner had thought about himself. And not surprisingly, sales are continuing to decline. I think it's important to get that feedback, but you need to take it honestly and think about what do they really need versus is it just me thinking the market needs it versus the market telling me that's what they need.
And I think one last point on that is metrics are nice because they can eliminate emotion. And so the metrics and the measurements and these data points, they can eliminate emotion. And sometimes we have to get out of our own way because what Jade just said happens all the time where you're like, no, this is what I want it to do. And the client's like, well, I don't want to buy that. But you're like, well, but this is the cool part of what I'm offering. And the client still says, well, I'm not actually interested. I mean, the metrics, all these measurements that we have are emotionless. And so they help us. They paint the picture black or white without any kind of emotion or argument. And that's important to not, that's why I think metrics and measurements are important, because you don't have to fight the metric. You don't have to fight, I mean, it just explains and it shows something that you either need to improve on or things that you're doing well at. And you don't, there's not that emotion involved that we typically, sometimes as business owners get ourselves into.
Well, and it's starting to become a little bit more clear based on what we've just discussed, is we definitely have to understand the basics when it comes to profitability and the ratios, Jade, that you hit and you kind of covered there. But it's so important to understand that intangible metric when it comes to value proposition and how it relates, because it's not always about the financials, right? It's so much more. But let's talk a little bit also about, because again, you see it all with your customers. What are some of the biggest traps that these business owners are getting into? We talked a little about ego, right? I mean, obviously that's a big one. But when you're seeing it from a CFO perspective, again, the CPA, and then from a business standpoint in general, what are some of the biggest traps small, medium-sized business owners are getting into when it comes to financial metrics? Jade, let's start with you.
I think one of the big traps, there's literally dozens and dozens of metrics, some of which might apply to every industry and many of which are very industry specific. And I think one of the big traps is trying to look at way too many things. Cameron touched on this earlier. You could have 100 metrics and then you don't know what to do with any of them. I think it's really important to focus down on about 4 or 5 metrics that really impact your business that you can focus on. If you've got too many more than that, you're not going to be able to concentrate, I think, very well on trying to figure out how to take action that drives the metric to a better point.
I think from our perspective, one of the things that I see often is we'll go into a client meeting and I'll ask the client, how are things going? And they say, they are fantastic. I can't believe how busy we are. Everything's going really, really well. And then we'll go over their financial statements and they have a big loss. And so then we start to ask, well, how come things are going so well when you have a big loss? And the reason is because they're using a metric that's the wrong metric. They're equating busy to successful. And so when we start looking at that and they're thinking, I'm really, really busy, that isn't the metric actually that they should be looking at. And even though they're incredibly busy, we don't want to be busy to produce 0 in profit. That's a bad metric to use. So again, right measurements, and I think sometimes getting help from outside people to just help measure that, because again, wrong measurements lead to wrong results every single time. And that's what happens often in a lot of businesses. They're thinking they're doing really, really well. In the construction businesses, often what happens is you have a percentage of completion or progress billings. And what happens in the construction world is they're overbilling, and so their cash flow is high, things they think are going well, but it's because they haven't delivered the back end of all the expenses that are coming, because they've almost pre-billed, they've overbilled. So they think things are going really, really well, but in the end, when the job catches up, they're gonna lose money on that job. They just billed it, early. So they thought things were going well. Again, busy is not profitable. So wrong metric equals a wrong result every time.
Sure. Yeah, and I think using the metrics to make decisions, we need to look and be aware of the whole loaf of bread, right? And when we pull metrics on a given period, we're looking at one slice. We need to know where they were the whole time, right? So first end of the butt end of the loaf, right? What do? We made a decision based on metrics. Well, then, 4 or 5 slices in, we need to be, hey, did we make the right decision? Is it having the impact we want? Those kind of things. So for sure, yeah, you definitely have to have the whole loaf.
Now, Greg, I want to come back to you just really quick. You talked about the importance to see the end game, the exit strategy. Can you briefly talk about that as well? Is how important it is for business owners who, whether they're starting a business or they're well into it, to understand that end game when it comes to financial metrics?
Yeah, well, I work with a ton of startups, right, for the most part, and that's probably the easiest and most difficult time to start thinking about how am I going to end this, right? So the Mark Zuckerbergs, the unicorns, right, in control, making masses of money and own most of it, right? That's rare. having an idea and thinking about it as early as when you're writing your first business plan. How am I going to get out of this? Am I selling it? Am I taking a management position and giving away equity for funding and maybe a little bit of control? You have to think about how you want that to happen, right? And then of course we see a ton of serial entrepreneurs that are very clear. After their first one, maybe they didn't have it so much planned out. They sold it. They're at home golfing 8 days a week, and suddenly like, oh, I got to do something else, and they get back in. Now they've decided, hey, I like the building part. I don't like the sustained management. So they've come to a conclusion as to how they want to do it. For existing businesses, everyone gets a year older every year, so we need to know where that's going to be. And one of the really cool things we see at the SBA a ton is small businesses where either it's a family member that's coming up through the ranks, learning the ropes as they go, eventually assuming. There is a ton of implications for planning that transition from a change of ownership perspective on the financing side. We also see non-relations, people that have been that go-to loyal employee for 10 years. He wants to stay, the ownership wants to leave. Well, that takes planning. You can't just do it in 6 hours. It's often multiple years of figuring out those pieces and having a conversation with lenders and stuff like that to, hey, what do you need? How does this need to go? Because there are some things you can do that will definitely kill the deal with SBA helping you.
So again, it's so important to have those financial metrics and the other data available, because that's going to really pay off for you if you're tracking it early in the process as it relates to your exit strategy.
Yeah, and as my wife would say, it's your legacy building in most cases, right? Small ownership, right? It's your legacy. Well, does it just go poof when you're done, or does it sustain itself, right? So, yeah.
Great. Well, we only have a couple minutes left, and I wanted to ask each one of you is, if you had, for our small, medium-sized business owners out there watching today, if you had one piece of advice you would give them as it relates to financial metrics, what would that be for them for a takeaway today?
Well, I'll start on that one. I think one of the things is look at the package of slides that they'll send out afterwards, but decide now that you're going to spend some time. It's tough to pull away and think about more strategic issues, but I think it's important to do that so that over time you don't find yourself in a spot like Greg was just talking about, where you say, oh, I wish 2 or 3 years ago I would have thought about measuring these different things. At that point, it's too late. So every month or every quarter, at least every quarter, pull some time away and try to think strategically about what am I really trying to do and how am I trying to get there. That will be, I think, a significant help for most small businesses.
And I think from my perspective, I would say maybe the most important metric is, am I enjoying what I am doing? And as business owners, you wear so many different hats, as has been mentioned, and that is difficult sometimes. That's frustrating, it's challenging. And so what I'd say is, if you're not enjoying what you're doing, then stop. And I think what Jade just mentioned is stop, pull back for a second and figure it out so that you don't continue down the same path and go the same way. And to Greg's point, if you're not enjoying what you're doing, something is going to happen to the profitability and to the success of that business that will affect the bottom, the sell price that you eventually are going to get, or you're not even going to be able to sell it because you're so tired. I've seen that so many times. You drive the business into the ground because you're so tired, you sell at the wrong time because you're not enjoying what you're doing. So for me, a real important metric is just, do you enjoy what you're doing? And if you're not, it's time to take a step back and make a change in some way, shape, or form, because that's not how business should be.
Yeah, and I would emphasize Jade's point there. There's nothing better than knowing what you don't know. You have to understand where your deficiencies are and fill those with people that do. And the opportunity cost of getting that wrong is not realized right away. It's down the road like, oh man, I've been mismanaging this. I should have hired a consultant to help me with this, or I should have gone to the SBA and found out what was available. So yeah, it's definitely an egocentric thing, but knowing what you don't know. And somewhere in my life a long time ago, someone told me, don't ever say I don't know to a question. Say, I don't have that information, let me get it for you. I'll be right back, right? So that's the whole same kind of thing.
Well, gentlemen, it's so informative today. We could have talked hours on this topic, but again, we will be sending out the profitability ratios and how to calculate those in the packet that we immediately following today's segment. I also have displayed on the board here the contact information. So if you have additional questions for Jade, Cameron, or Greg, you'll see all their contact information on the screen right now. So be sure to contact them if you have any questions. They are definitely the subject matter experts as it relates to business and financial acumen. And again, we could have talked a whole lot longer today, but I appreciate your time. Very informative and good information for this community. So thank you for your time. I'd also like to remind you to stick around because we have a guest speaker today. Smith Miller with Strategic Tax Solutions is going to join us on stage, and we're going to talk about a business tax credit that every business owner should be made aware of. So we'll be right back after these messages with Smith Miller. Thank you.
You know BBSI for the expertise and support our local business partners provide. Now discover an enhanced level of access and control with My BBSI, a proprietary online portal that puts the power of information into the hands of you and your team. Streamline your human resources activities with 100% paperless onboarding. Simplify payroll with direct integration of data from TimeNet. Then calculate and process payroll in minutes. Put your data to work for you with powerful reporting tools and discover new insights into your business operations. Discover what My BBSI can do for your organization. Call or write today to speak with a specialist.
All right, welcome back to Understanding the Metrics Needed to Drive Profit. I'm your host, Nick Aldinger. And on stage with me, I'm excited to introduce Smith Miller, CEO of Strategic Tax Solutions. And we have an important topic to talk about today, Smith. You specialize in a certain tax credit. And once you told me about this tax credit and the customers you deal with, it's amazing how many people don't know about this tax credit, and they may be leaving thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars on the table just because they weren't aware of this tax credit. Can you tell me a little bit about the R&D tax credit?
Yeah, sure. To simplify it, it's the R&D tax credit is a federal and state tax credit for corporations and ultimately individuals or owners. It reduces their tax liability. For small businesses, it's tens of thousands of dollars annually. For the larger businesses here in the Treasure Valley, we save hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. And usually the conversation is like, this sounds too good to be true. So it's an educational process.
And just, we're going to talk about some misconceptions with this tax credit here in a second, but how would businesses just, you have a process to how you would qualify for this tax credit, and it's fairly straightforward. Can you talk about those pillars on how a business could just check to see if they qualify for something like this?
Yeah, so we do an analysis for free before we're ever engaged, but basically there's a 4-part test that every taxpayer, if they satisfy that 4-part test, irregardless of what business they're in, if they're profitable or going to be profitable, you're eligible for the credit. And the 4-part test goes like this. You must set out to improve a product or process. It must be technical in nature. There must be uncertainty on the onset. And then you must go through an iterative process of trial and error to answer your hypothesis and or get to your end result, your building, your widget, whatever it is. So that's the 4-part test that you were referring to.
And I think we're sharing that on the screen for those who are watching today. And again, if you're watching, we'll be sending this out to you so you don't have to write everything down. We will be sharing that with you in the email that will follow this segment today. But I know what you just said about the 4 pillars and whether you meet those requirements, but it's really not that complicated either, and people might think automatically, well, I might not fit that, but that's where you come in, and you've found out in several instances that, matter of fact, after getting into the details of the business and the operations, that some of these business owners do qualify for this tax credit.
Right, and that's one of the myths is most people think that we don't have an R&D department, we don't do R&D, therefore we're not eligible. And per the tax code, satisfying that 4-part test that we just discussed, which a lot of businesses, majority of businesses out there qualify for. I mean, I can give you an example of design build contractors, HVAC firms, anybody manufacturing anything, software companies, people running CAD. Those are just some of the distilleries, wineries. The list just goes on. So it's really, again, it's educational, and that's the biggest part of it, is the educational component of it. Another misconception is that we're going to take over the CPA work, and that is just not true. We are a value add. There's 2 tax codes we work in. We don't deviate from it. We never have, and we never will. So we're a value add to every CPA firm out there, because we know where our lane is and we stay in it. So.
Yeah, and so speaking of those misconceptions, you just hit on the big one, right? I mean, people think, well, I already have a CPA. My CPA is going to take care of it. But you actually work with CPAs. You don't replace CPAs. And CPAs love it, right? And because there's so much more work that's needed when it comes to the details needed to maximize that tax return, right?
And that's correct. And we go in, and once we take on a client, we own it. We own the portion of the R&D, and we stand behind it, and we defend it. And it's all about substantiation. So it's substantiation, substantiation, substantiation. That's the key to making it successful, and that's why we've been successful with the credit.
And another misconception, and again, you hit on it, is people think that, it's only for technology companies or only for manufacturing. But again, you hit on a few there. It's pretty much a wide cast net in terms of who could qualify for this R&D tax credit, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, like I mentioned, a few of the industries that are eligible. I would encourage everybody, if especially now with the current environment that we're in right now, the saving every dime to be competitive in your industry and to get a leg up on your competition. This is something that can be a game changer for a lot of these firms, and especially in the environment we're in right now. It's paramount that people at least check into it. It's worth the conversation.
And probably another misconception and an important one for our audience is that they might even have software that says, hey, we capture this R&D tax credit. Or maybe even a CPA might say to them, we captured that R&D tax credit. But there's often a lot of money left on the table because the software can't get in the details on how you operate and run your business. Is that correct?
No, you hit on a subject. Absolutely. The software does a good process of bringing things to light, but it does not do the diligence that we do behind the scenes. So it's just great. It scratches the surface. What we do, our due diligence and our substantiation goes way deeper than any software can. So it's just not as easy as an algorithm.
And about how long does this take on dealing with customers? Because you do a lot of the work for them up front, but we're getting ready to I can't believe, and it's a good thing that 2021 is right around the corner, but we're going to get into tax season, right? When should they reach out and get involved with your firm?
Anytime it's never too late. So anytime. But it usually comes up around tax time because people investigate. They'll hear about the R&D tax credit. They'll mention it to their CPA, and then they'll say, "Hey, let's look into it." So, but there's never a bad time to look into it. It's never too late. So.
And Smith, how can they get a hold of you? I know we're displaying your contact information on the board, but can you tell the audience how they could get in touch with you?
Sure. So my email is probably one of the best. smiller@ststaxcredits.com is probably one of the best ways to get in touch with me. And then there's 3 other numbers on the screen. Any one of those numbers is also a great way to get in touch with us. So.
Great. And again, we're going to be sharing a package that goes into a little bit more detail about the overview of the R&D tax credit, and then what it is, the history about it, and then again those 4 pillars that we mentioned, and a little bit more information. We're going to be sending that out to the audience today in a packet. Smith, I appreciate your time. I appreciate all you do for our community. This is a really informative session, and we just need to spread the word about this R&D tax credit. It's saving a lot of money for a lot of business owners. Appreciate you being with us today.
Oh, and thanks for having me. And I'll be spending more time with you in May 6th, 2021.
That's right. Yes, and thanks for mentioning that, Smith. Smith is going to be speaking in more detail about R&D tax credit at Business Builder Day on May 6th at the Galaxy Event Center. So we look forward to hearing that detailed presentation, and it'll definitely go more into the details during that segment. So thanks again for joining us today, Smith. We appreciate your time. And coming up next, we have Brent Odkin with the Traction segment. And today, Brent's going to be breaking down how to use and implement a scorecard and how it relates to the financial metrics and leading indicators we just discussed. So we'll take a quick break, hear from our sponsors, and be right back with Brent. Thanks again.
If you're looking to grow your bottom line, join us to gain resources on growth strategies, social media, fraud protection, workplace culture, hiring, and more. Register to attend Business Builder Day, a free event for business professionals, May 6th at the Galaxy Event Center.
Imagine you're on an airplane, you're flying across the ocean, and the pilot comes on the intercom and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have some good news and some bad news. The bad news is we've lost our radio. We really can't hear the control tower or other airplanes around us, and our gauges aren't working. We don't know our heading. We don't know our altitude. We don't know our airspeed. So we're really kind of flying blind here. The good news, however, is we've got this thing at full throttle and we're making great time." That sounds ridiculous, but think about how many businesses operate like that. They don't have good understanding of where they're at. They don't know where they're heading. They don't know really much of anything that's going on in their business other than they're just working super hard and they're hoping to somehow achieve a goal that they really don't even have clear in their mind of what they're trying to achieve. Contrast that to an organization that everybody knows how they're doing, they know where they're going, and they know how well they're progressing toward that. They also have great communication. They're staying connected with each other, and they know what's going on with each other in the business. Now, when you look at your business, you realize that as you're looking kind of top down to your business, there's really 6 key components that make up your business. And so the EOS model that I'm going to show you today is really a graphical illustration of those components that already exist in your business. For example, you have a vision component. There is a direction of where you need to go with the organization. And when you strengthen that vision component, you know where you're going and you know how you're going to get there. Now, you're not going to achieve your vision without great people. And so you need to understand what makes up for great people for your organization. Your organization is different than any other organization. And so you really need to understand, how do I know that I have the right people in the right seats doing the right things? Third is the data component. You've got to cut through the egos, the subjectives, the assumptions, and really get down to the hard data and say what's actually happening in the business. And when you strengthen the data component, you have clarity as to what's exactly going on. And in fact, when you strengthen all 3 of these components, what you realize is there's a lot of impurities, there's a lot of issues that you need to deal with. And that brings us to the 4th component, which is the issues component. You really need to understand what's going on, smoke out those issues, and then solve them at the root and make them go away forever. In fact, great leaders are just really good at solving their issues. The next component is the process component. There is a right and best way for you to do what you do. And there's a handful of core processes in your business. You need to identify what those core processes are and make sure that everybody's following those processes. You're doing that to some degree today, but to get 100% in that component is you've clarified and simplified those processes and everybody's following those processes. And finally, the traction component is really where the rubber meets the road. This is where you execute and make things happen in the business. And there's no mistake that vision is on top of traction, because vision without traction is hallucination. You've got to be good at executing and making sure that people are accountable and disciplined to get you where you want to go in the organization. A great way to understand how you're doing in this component is look at your internal meetings. If your internal meetings, if you would rate them on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being best, if you would rate your internal meetings between a 4 and a 6, you've got a lot of work to do in the traction component. And it's really important that you focus in on that and make that component 100% strong. Now, today what we're going to do is we're going to focus in on the data component. Last month, we talked about the vision component and the issues component and how to strengthen those in order to make good decisions and really to become a great leader. And in fact, we talked about the fact that decision-making and making good decisions is one of the common denominators of great leaders. Today, as we dig into the data component, what we're going to do is we're going to really look at how do we strengthen this component so that we can get the most out of it. Now, the panelists shared some great insights, and I hope you were feverishly taking notes because there's a lot of wisdom there. You might want to watch the replay and take more notes on that, but there were some very good nuggets on how to strengthen this component. Today, what I want to do is I want to walk through the 2 tools that I use with my clients that help them strengthen this component. And the panelists referred to this already. The first is scorecard. It's the handful of numbers that give you a good pulse on the business. It's that cockpit dashboard, if you will, and using our airplane example, of where are we going? What are we trying to accomplish? And what are the numbers that are going to help us get there? Which leads us to the measurables. The measurables are the numbers that we need to keep accountable, that we need to keep on track, that we're accountable to drive those numbers. Now, let's tackle the scorecard first. The scorecard is very simple. You don't need to get too creative or too expansive on what your numbers, the numbers that you're looking for. There's really only 4 elements to a scorecard, and we're going to go over those in a sec. But before we do, your scorecard as a leadership team really needs to consist of just a handful of numbers that are going to give you a good pulse on the business. You're looking for leading indicators. You're looking for those numbers that are going to help you understand the outcome you'll ultimately end up getting. If you look at lagging indicators, if you look at what's already happened, that's already in the past, and then you have to take time to try to fix those and correct those, and the damage is already done. So leading indicators are going to help you understand what needs to happen to correct that behavior before it becomes a problem. An example of this is I have a client that was very frustrated with their profitability, and so they were couldn't understand why they couldn't get their profit numbers up. They were working hard, they were doing all kinds of things. Profit always kept coming in under where they wanted it to be. In going through this exercise, they realized that if they looked at the number of trucks that were out of service, it directly correlated to their profitability number at the end of the month. And so now what they do is they measure that, and they keep a weekly pulse on that number to make sure that number stays on track. And as a result, their profitability has climbed. So looking at the scorecard, the 4 areas of the scorecard, the first is you want to understand who owns the number that we're talking about. By this, we're not saying who can pull the number, who can pull the report, but who actually impacts that number. In my example with the service trucks, the service manager is the one that can make sure those trucks are staying active, not the finance person who's probably pulling the report. Next, you need to understand what is the measurable. What are we needing to measure that's going to actually make a difference? And then the third thing is we want to have a goal for that measurable. So if we have a measurable, what's our goal? What are we trying to hit? And how do we know if we're on track or off track? So the goal is very important. Finally, the fourth thing is to keep a 13-week running picture of what's actually happening. Be able to look at the results over a period of about 3 months so you can start spotting patterns and trends. And as you can see in this example, there's some red numbers. Those numbers are off track, and we need to be able to drop those down, use our issues component and our traction component to actually solve those issues and get those numbers back on track. Now, in Gino Wickman's book, Traction, in chapter 5, he talks about the importance of measurables. And one of the things he talks about is 8 reasons for having measurables. And so let's walk through those real quickly. First, measurables and numbers cut through kind of that murky subjective communication between manager and employee. We've all been there where we've had a misalignment of understanding of what was expected, and the numbers really clarify that. Next, numbers create accountability. When you have a number, you know what you're accountable for. You know what you need to keep on track. Accountable people actually appreciate numbers. And this might be surprising to many of you, and I find this with a lot of my clients, is they think, oh, well, we're kind of like a family here. We really trust each other, and we can't really do that. But actually, accountable people appreciate having numbers. They appreciate that clarity. And if they don't, that might be an indicator of a different problem you need to look at. To that point, numbers create clarity and commitment. If we know exactly what's expected, there's clarity about that, and we can be committed to making sure those numbers stay on track. We know what we need to do. Numbers do create competition. So if you've got an ops department, say, and you're tracking errors between different people, there's kind of this commitment or this competition that's created to help them get better results, which leads us to this next one, which is the numbers produce better results. You probably heard what gets measured gets done. And that's what happens when we look at a number and we're focusing in on that. The results happen naturally. Numbers also create teamwork. had an example with a team recently where they were the finance numbers were off, and they're just chronically off. They just kept being red, and nobody really did anything about it. They finally came around and said, hey, how do we get these numbers on track? And they worked together as a team because all the different parts of the business were required to get those numbers back on track. And finally, numbers solve problems faster. This gets back to having leading indicators. If you can see a problem early, you can address that issue and make corrective action before that problem becomes a big obstacle that you have to overcome. So 100% strong in the data component is the two things, scorecard and measurables. It's important that you focus in on making sure that a scorecard is useful, that you have the right numbers. It's going to give you a good pulse on the business. You want to have a scorecard at the leadership team level as well as in all the departments. And then measurables simply is making sure that you have a number. Everybody has a number that they're accountable to keep on track. That they're driving that number for the success of the organization. So let's talk about a few next steps. First is you want to identify your measurables. Look to those things that can really help you get where you want to go in the business. Take a look at those 8 reasons for having measurables as you're starting to create your measurables and see, are the things that I'm looking at accomplishing those 8 things? Look again for leading indicators, things that are going to end up in the result you're looking for. And then create and use your weekly scorecard. It's going to be difficult. It's not always easy to put these together and use them on a weekly basis, but it's super important that you do that. And then I'd also encourage you to take the organizational checkup. There's a free tool that you can use. It's online that you can go in and really evaluate your organization on each of these 6 components. And how are you doing in those areas? What areas do you need to maybe put a little extra emphasis in? When you do this, when you take these steps, what you'll find is that the organization is going to be able to run a lot better, and you're going to get a lot more of what you want out of the business. So to conclude, if you find that your business maybe is more like the example of the airplane in the story I started out with, it doesn't have to be that way. Strengthening the data component along with the other components in the business, getting your scorecards right, getting the measurables that are going to show where you're going with the business and what you need to deal with and correct can really make the business run a lot better and a lot more enjoyable, a lot more profitable. Thank you.
Santa, are we still gonna have Christmas this year?
Of course we're gonna have Christmas this year. It's just gonna be a little bit different.
St. Alphonsus Festival of Trees is kicking off the holiday season. And while COVID-19 has changed our lives, there's a few things that will never change.
My dedication to my patients hasn't changed.
My commitment to quality care hasn't changed.
And neither will the spirit of the St. Alphonsus Festival of Trees. This year's event will be virtual, and all proceeds will help St. Alphonsus in the fight against COVID.
All right, welcome back. I want to thank you again for joining us today. And I want to thank Brent for that informative segment. Again, we'll be sending you those scorecards and measurables that Brent talked about later today. And I also want to invite you to join us again for our next Business Builder Insights on February 24th at 10 a.m. And our topic's going to be creating passionate employees. So that's definitely a segment you will not want to miss. Again, thanks for joining us today, and I appreciate your time, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.